Hi, this is Curt and welcome to another edition of Fire Law Vlog. I was actually able to get 2 days in a row of vlog, so that's, I think, a first. Today, we're going to be discussing a case that's going on right now in Rockport, Massachusetts. It's been in my Fire Law blog for a while, and it's been kicking around at least since September. But involves really a lot of turmoil in a relatively small and amazingly quaint and beautiful fishing village, Rockport, Massachusetts. I actually did some scuba diving up there back in the day. Just beautiful waters up there. Unlike the waters we have here in Rhode Island that are really kind of murky, just crystal clear. You can see 75-foot visibility, which is unusual for New England. But at any rate, I have attorney Liam O'Connell, who is representing Fire Chief James Doyle, um, and some other people in this dispute between the fire department and the town. And again, I mean, I don't really know much about what's going on, Liam, so I'm
Sure.
going to ask you to, kind of fill
Sure.
in everyone.
Sure. So, a little background is necessary. Little history lesson here. Um, like you said, Rockport's a very small town, quaint town, less than 7,000 people. A lot of seasonal residents. I live in Rockport with my wife and kids, and I represent Fire Chief James Jimmy Doyle, who's actually my wife's father. So I'm his son-in-law, and I also represent a group of taxpayers um, that have filed suit, and we'll get into that, I guess. But the background story is that starting in 2018 and 19, the town made some significant changes to how the town is operated. And when I say the town made changes, I don't mean the town made appropriate changes, with the town meeting and the town charter and the bylaws. What I mean is that the Board of Selectmen made changes and the town administrator that they appointed made changes. And those changes included first disbanding the personnel board. The town of Rockport had a personnel board pursuant to its bylaw that dealt with all the personnel issues. And the personnel regulations and policies, they promulgated those and they dealt with these issues. It is not clear to me to this day when, how, or why they disbanded the personnel board. It's still sitting in the Rockport bylaws that the personnel board has all these duties and responsibilities, but the personnel board is gone. And at the same time, they took this now town administrator. At the time, I believe he was either the interim town administrator or the assistant town administrator. They made him the human resources director. So now we have the human resources director instead of a personnel board. And so that was one of the changes that I think when you look back prompted a lot of these other changes that substantively affected the fire department in a much greater way. So in June of 2019, the town of Rockport appointed this town administrator, Mitchell Vieira, who he had previously been the assistant town administrator for Rockport, and before that, I believe he was an intern for Rockport. And so they made him the town administrator, and part of his duties and responsibilities and authority in his contract was to serve as public safety commissioner. And now, as town administrator in Rockport, his relationship with the town is done by contract. The town administrator's duties and authority doesn't even appear in the town bylaws. So it's all done by contract. And that's where we found in the contract that they had made him the public safety commissioner. Now, in order to have a public safety commissioner, the town has to approve that by town meeting, by a vote. And that's in accordance with Massachusetts law. So that right there is an issue because the town meeting has never approved a public safety commissioner. and the Board of Selectmen just made him the public safety commissioner without the authority to do so. So that was in June of 2019. At the same time, I mean, literally, we're talking the same weeks. The assistant chief of police was appointed as the emergency services director. And part of his job description as the emergency services director was to essentially take over the fire department, the operations, the maintenance, the administrative issues, the training, everything. I mean, just take it over. Now, Rockport is, like I mentioned, they have the traditional open meeting style of government, where the residents, the registered voters are the legislature and the Board of Selectmen are the executive. Now, we operate by town charter, which is only been amended twice since it was first enacted in 1959. And as part of our town charter, the Board of Selectmen can appoint Board of Fire Engineers. And that right there, as you know much better than I do probably, the legal reality of what a Board of Engineers is, that's all defined by Massachusetts law. And the Board of Engineers, the Board of Fire Engineers, once they're appointed to that board, they then vote on who's going to be the chief and who will be the assistant chief, secretary, treasurer of the Board of Engineers. And pursuant to state law, the Board of Engineers have all the authority to run the entire fire department, maintenance, training, personnel, putting new firemen on, getting rid of firemen, everything, the whole gambit. It's run by the Board of Engineers. That's how state law works, and that's what Rockport's fire department. That's how it's set up. The board, legally, the Board of Engineers run the fire department. So what happened in 2019 when you had the town administrator be made public safety commissioner, which a public safety commissioner pursuant to state law runs the police department and the fire department. And this guy, when he got that position, I don't even think he was 30 years old, and he has no firefighting experience or police experience for that matter. So they made him the public safety commissioner, and then they made the assistant chief of police, who has zero firefighting experience, the emergency services director, and he just took over for the Board of Engineers. You could take a look, and it's in my complaint that we filed on behalf of the taxpayers. You could take a look at the assistant police chief's job description, which is part of that complaint, and compare that to the various statutes that I outlined in the complaint of what the Board of Engineers' duties and authorities are, and they're almost identical. I mean, they basically took the Board of Engineers' legal capacity and gave it to this cop. And the town has never voted on changing its charter. The town has never voted on changing any of these things. The Board of Selectmen just did this. They just made him the emergency services director. Now, this was all the same time, both these things, the public safety commissioner, town administrator, and the emergency services director, assistant police chief. This was all done at the same time. The town hired the police chief's wife, her solo practice law firm, to investigate the fire chief. This all happened during June of 2019. It's all there.
What was the basis for the investigation?
So the basis for the investigation was one day, Jimmy, I call him Jimmy because he's my father-in-law, but one day Chief Doyle was in the local hardware store's parking lot, and him and another fireman that they've known their entire lives had a verbal altercation. Jimmy said something to him, and the guy filed a complaint. And when the town administrator confronted Chief Doyle about it in the fire department, in the station, there was another now retired assistant fire chief there with him. And the town administrator said, so-and-so filed a complaint. He said, you said this. And Jimmy said, yeah, I did say it because he is. And the town administrator agreed with Jimmy. And, we have a witness to that. So he admitted to saying it. And now we're going to hire the police chief's wife to investigate this. And this ended up as some purported last chance agreement that the town had Jimmy Chief Doyle sign after 45 years. Here's your last chance because you said something to so-and-so. So-and-so isn't even a fireman anymore. And he could thank Mitch, the town administrator, and the emergency services director for that. So it's not even, Jimmy wasn't even involved with that. So the whole thing is bananas. This last chance agreement, resulting from the police chief's wife's investigation of the fire chief. I mean, this is out of a afternoon TV special. It's so ridiculous. So then this is June 2019. These people are put in charge. They usurp the entire fire department, and they spend the next 18 months just pushing the Board of Engineers out of the way. And this assistant police chief just took over everything. You should see the emails I have from this guy to the fire chief, to the Board of Engineers, telling the firemen that they should be more involved with cleaning the station, because it's going to give them, it's going to make them feel better about being a fireman and this and that, and telling them what it's like to be a fireman, telling them what they should do, and then bossing the Board of Engineers around at every step of the way, telling them to discipline firemen, ordering them to discipline firemen. And the list goes on. It's enumerated in my complaint. But one of the bigger ones was when, well, not one of the bigger ones, I'd say the biggest one was when COVID broke out last spring. The Board of Health in Rockport mandated that people wear masks in the downtown district. And if you're familiar with Rockport, the downtown district is essentially, the downtown area that extends out to Bearskin Neck, where all the little shops are and whatnot. And the assistant police chief wanted the firemen to walk around on COVID-19 mask duty and tell people to wear their masks. And the big thing that has been lost by the town, the Board of Selectmen and the town administrator, is that these firemen are volunteers. I mean, they have full-time jobs, they have families, and nobody signed up to do this mask duty because they were going to get paid, I don't know what it was, $18 an hour or something like that, to walk around and enforce Board of Health, mandates. I don't even know what the legal authority is for that, but it's also just absurd. I mean, these people volunteer to fight fires. They volunteer to wake up in the middle of the night and run out the door to go make sure their neighbor's house doesn't burn down. They don't volunteer, to do COVID-19 mask patrol. And when they didn't sign up to do it, and there are emails that I have that make it very clear, the assistant police chief said, well, you're not going to train. And he did not allow them. Now we have a situation where the assistant chief of police is not allowing the entire fire department to train for over 8 months. This went on until November.
Because they wouldn't do the COVID mask details?
Exactly.
There's a linkage between you do what I tell you to do, you go out and do these COVID mask details, or else you can't train?
I'd say that linkage is about as accurate as why they put a cop in charge of the fire department.
And was there any rationalization for?
I have no idea what the rationalization was for any of it, to put these people in charge, to make the firemen, or mandate the firemen do this mask duty. And when they didn't sign up, we're now going to make sure that the firemen cannot train, and that the town doesn't have a fire department that's training. And it got to the point where the fire department, as you know how it's run, you have the Board of Engineers, and then below the Board of Engineers, you have the various companies. And, the companies, they train intra-company. So, you have this company that does training together, and, and sometimes all the companies do training together as well, but usually it's training by company. And in order for any of the companies to train, or even take an engine out to run it or maintain it, that authority had to go through the assistant police chief, not the Board of Engineers.
So to get fuel, let's say, and first of all, I want to just clarify, when you say companies, are these independent volunteer fire companies, or is everybody part of the town of Rockport Fire Department?
No, everybody's part of the same department.
Okay, so it's one. Right. So there's no 501c3 entities out there.
There is the Rockport Firemen's Association, which they're all members of. But that makes up everybody, whether retired or active, that, whatever company they're in.
Is that like a social organization?
Yeah.
It's not exactly. An operational
No,
organization. They
no,
don't own the trucks. They don't own
no.
the,
The town owns the trucks, and the engineers are the ones that are in charge of the trucks and in charge of maintaining everything, and that's by state law.
Okay, so
So
if one of the trucks needed fuel, uh, do they have to check with the assistant police chief, in order to go take the truck out and get fuel?
yes,
Where's the fire chief fit into this? Why doesn't you know?
the the changes that they made in June of 2019, which I've outlined in the complaint, which were completely not in accordance with state law and the town charter, usurped the fire chief, and the board of engineers out of the whole picture. And that's why the firemen got to the point on November 9th of 2020 where they sent their letter.
Okay,
And that
let's go
letter
into that,
made,
because again, I am familiar with what happened, but let's let everybody know. So on, we say November 9th.
yes. So,
So, well, let me kind of back up. So the firefighters were not siding with the town or with the assistant police chief. They were siding with Chief Doyle.
oh, absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely.
So now November 9th comes, then what happens on November 9th?
Right. So, after, if you think about it, June of 2019 is when the assistant police chief came in and became, essentially the fire chief. When he came in, from then until November 9th of 2020, so you're talking about, 15 or so months, a little over a year. This is after multiple firemen have been terminated. Firemen are on leave.
What types of things were they being terminated for?
I can't get into I don't know all of the instances just because it's their personnel information, but I do know of some of them because it's been shared to me by them. One guy in particular who was an officer, he was a volunteer fireman and a volunteer EMT in the ambulance. He was also the town's, dog catcher, essentially, the animal control officer, which is a stipend position. It's not a W-2 position. It's a stipend. You're going to be the animal control officer. And, when you're here, if there's a call, you got to go. Something like that. I don't know the particulars of the job. But either way, this assistant chief of police had a problem with him as dog catcher. And part of the problem with him as dog catcher, he's no longer allowed to be a volunteer fireman or a volunteer EMT. He was terminated from everything. And that's what the town is doing. If you have a position with the town, say you work for the DPW and you're a volunteer fireman, and you end up with a problem as a DPW operator, whatever it is, you end up with a problem with that job. They'll terminate you from the DPW, and they'll also make sure you can't be a volunteer fireman. And I don't really understand that one at all. If the fire department has no problem with you, then why are we getting rid of volunteers? But this happened over a year, where this assistant police chief took over control of everything. And I'll read a couple things just so we all know what was going on. He's ordered firefighters around at active fire scenes.
He gave operational orders?
Yes.
Okay.
Numerous times.
He's got no training in
no training and no legal authority other than this purported position that the Board of Selectmen gave him. There's no legal authority for him to order any of the firemen around, let alone at an active fire scene. He became the sole authority on deciding which apparatus could be operated, whether it was for maintenance or training. You weren't gonna take a fire engine or any other apparatus out of the fire stations without the assistant police chief's approval. That's what they created. And even Chief Doyle at one point referred to the assistant chief of police as director, because he was the emergency services director, and he called him director. And Jimmy got in trouble for that because he wasn't calling this guy chief.
Well, in my mind, emergency services is police, fire, and EMS. So was he also in charge of the police?
Well, he was as the assistant police chief.
So he oversaw the police chief in his role as emergency services director?
I don't think that he oversaw the police chief.
Yeah, because that's really now we're
It's bizarre, and it wasn't just, they gave him the fire department, the forest fire department, the harbor master, anything they could stick in there. And that's another problem. The harbor master, by state law, reports to the appointing authority only. So this whole concept, and they all do, this whole concept that these individuals are going to now report to the assistant police chief because some town administrator thought this was a great idea despite the town charter and state law. I mean, this is what they did. And now all these people are reporting to the assistant police chief, and now we're here.
Well, let's get back. I know I derailed us a little bit, but let's get to November 9th.
It's a very layered story. I mean, it's hard for me to get out because it's very layered and convoluted, and it's complicated. Yeah. So November 9th. So, after months and months and months of this, and months and months and months of the firemen not being able to train. I mean, we're talking, it was over 8 months. On November 9th, it was a Monday, the members of the Rockport Firemen's Association, most of them, I think they're, maybe they were missing a couple of them, but the, vast majority of the Rockport firemen signed a letter, and they sent it to the Board of Selectmen on November 9th. And that letter stated that the firemen demanded the town to remove the assistant chief of police as the emergency services director, remove one of the assistant fire chiefs, he was a Board of Engineer member, and to reinstate Fire Chief Jimmy Doyle as the fire chief and give him back the control of the fire department that is what the state law says, what the state law mandates. Basically, they demanded the town to comply with the state law and the town charter, or they were going to quit.
Well, one of the things now, maybe I missed it, but how did Chief Doyle go from being the chief to not being the chief prior to November 9th? Like did that go back to that incident that you already talked about? Or
no.
How did he get removed?
He was still there. He was still there. He was still the fire chief, but he couldn't do anything unless the assistant police chief said he could.
Okay.
So essentially, you had a Board of Engineers and its fire chief reporting to the assistant police chief, which is not how this is set up by state law. If anything, they report to the Board of Selectmen, the appointing authority. That's who they report to. And in 2018 and 19, at the same time, they get rid of the personnel board, and this town administrator basically becomes the public safety commissioner. When all that happened, they also, the Board of Selectmen, stopped serving as liaisons to the public safety departments. So if you go back in town meeting minutes, you'll see that the selectmen every year, they are given liaison positions to the various boards and committees of the town.
My town, the town of Exeter has that.
Yeah, that's how they
person that's assigned as the fire department liaison.
Right. And that's how they run the town as the executive, by going to these boards and learning what's going on. And that's how they run the town. They stopped serving as liaisons to the public safety departments at this same time. They just pulled it back and gave it all to this town administrator, and the town never knew. So no one in the town had any clue what was going on.
The town charter. They just
right. The town charter today still says that they shall have a board of engineers.
Yeah, so we refer to that as ultra-virus, right? That it's
right.
It's acting without legal authority.
Exactly. And everything they've done by hiring the police chief to run the fire department, the assistant police chief to run the fire department, by hiring the police chief's wife to investigate the fire chief for something that is so ridiculous. I mean, he admitted to saying it. It happened in a public place when they weren't at work. And we're gonna take a guy with 45 years and then say, oh no, we're gonna actually pay the police chief's wife to investigate this, and then it's gonna end up with giving you a last chance. This is what's happening. And the personnel, where is the personnel board? The personnel board was supposed to be there, and they're just not there. No idea what happened there.
Well, I know the November 9th letter led to a lot of headlines about the fire department threatening to quit.
Right.
And so in response to that letter, I think, did the board soften, or did the Board of Selectmen? And for those of you who aren't familiar with it's really a Massachusetts term, selectmen. We use town council or Board of Supervisors, some places will call it. But did what was their response to the threat to quit?
So their response to the threat, the November 9th letter, was the following day on November 10th, they put Chief Doyle on leave. And he signed the letter. So here you have a guy, 46 years, a volunteer for this town. Here you have a guy who signs a letter with the rest of the firemen telling the Board of Selectmen that they have to do the right thing and comply with state law, and that this the assistant police chief, is ruining everything. They don't even have as many volunteers as they used to, because no one wants to be there anymore. There's a morale problem because of this guy. And so what did the town do? The next morning, by noon, Jimmy was on leave and they told him, you have 24 hours to resign and retire.
Now,
and the next day was Veterans Day.
Did the Board of Supervisors, because they can't meet that quickly.
Right.
Who put them on? The Board of Supervisors, the town administrator, the assistant police chief, who put them on leave?
The town administrator, Vieira. And you're right, the Board of Selectmen did not meet. And they hadn't met about any of these issues, for some time. So actually, for as far as I can tell, for 2 years. So the town administrator did this on his own. He put Chief Doyle on leave the next day. So that letter goes to the Board of Selectmen that there are problems with the fire department, and we're telling you what they are. Now, this is important because the Board of Selectmen apparently didn't know there were any problems with the fire department until the firemen told them on November 9th, there are problems. These are the problems. This is how you fix the problems. You get rid of the assistant chief of police and you give the fire department back to the Board of Engineers and its fire chief. They told him, they said, this is the problem. This is how you fix it. And what did the town administrator do the following morning? Put Chief Doyle on leave. And now we're in a situation where Chief Doyle is on leave. This assistant police chief is still running the fire department, and the fire department have threatened to quit. We're talking about guys that have been firemen for Rockport for decades, whose fathers were firemen, and women whose fathers are firemen now. We have lots of son, daughter, and son firemen on the force. Legacies of firemen in this town, and they're that upset. I mean, they've never complained about anything forever. The budget for the Rockport Fire Department is $235,000 a year.
Yeah, that's the cost of one career firefighter.
Right, exactly. $235,000 a year for everything: training, fuel, you name it. And we have to fix what's not broken by putting a police officer in charge of the fire department. Who dreamt this idea up?
So what now? Where do we stand? What's happened between November 9th and now?
Yeah. So they placed Chief Doyle on leave the day after the letter, and then that week they came out. They had a public hearing or a public meeting the next week, and they had told the firemen, listen, we're gonna talk about this. We're gonna figure this out during the meeting. And when they got to the public meeting, the first thing they did was place the emergency services director's position, not the person, just the position, on suspension. So they took that out of the mix. Okay. So finally, someone realized that it was a violation of state law. And the first thing they did was they moved to suspend it. So now this assistant police chief is not in charge of the fire department.
Okay.
So that was done. And then they also said, yes, you guys can now start training. So yeah, go start training now.
But now, who's in charge of the fire department right now?
Well, during that November 17th meeting, I think it was pretty clear that the two remaining members of the Board of Engineers, one of which I'm not sure what his status is, I have no clue, but the other one who was a Board of Engineer member for a while, assistant fire chief for a while, I believe the town essentially put him in charge, but it's through the town administrator. The town administrator is coordinating the chain of command. That was all said during that November 17th meeting. So it sounds like the town administrator now is in charge of the fire department, which, depending on how you look at it, is either one step worse or one step better than the assistant police chief, but it's still not legal. And this was on November, that second week of November. And the Board of Selectmen during that meeting decided that, what we're going to do to fix this? we're gonna hire a consulting firm. We're gonna get someone to come in here and do an assessment of the fire department and tell us what we need to know. You know, so that went through a whole process, and 2 consulting groups applied for it, and the Board of Selectmen gave it to Municipal Resources Inc., MRI, which is a consulting firm out of New Hampshire, and they gave it to them. I believe January 12th they hired them, but the budget is unknown. We've heard that the budget is well into the six figures. So we're talking half the fire department's entire budget now we're spending on an assessor to come in and figure out what's wrong. I mean, there was nothing wrong except they put a cop in charge of the fire department. But, you know, I think one of the big problems the fire department had with the selection of MRI was, and they have since issued another letter on January 15th, I believe, the fire department issued another letter, was that the MRI had a conflict of interest. The town administrator had MRI stated this during the January 12th meeting, because and this is wild, but part of the RFQ for these consulting firms that the town developed was that the consulting firm that came in, or the assessor, if you will, that came in, they were going to serve on the Board of Engineers. So now we have a consultant that's going to come in and they're going to be on the Board of Engineers. And, you know, everyone really didn't understand how that was going to work, especially because obviously they're not going to live in Rockport. You know, how is this going to work? And MRI stated, because they were asked that, one of the selectmen said to MRI, you know, during the meeting, you guys have not, you know, given us a quote that includes one of you serving as a Board of Engineer during this process, which was part of the RFQ. Why not? And the MRI representative said, well, we had previously, Mitch had previously requested a proposal for interim staffing. So if that's what you want, someone to be on the Board of Engineers, you guys already have that proposal. So this all happened before the public, you know, RFQ went out. So Mitch was already, the town administrator was already in communications with MRI before the RFQ was even drafted. So the fire department, they don't want MRI touching this because they think that, you know, they were chosen before the RFQ was even written for obvious reasons. And I think that is certainly a, you know, reasonable position at this point. You know, there's a lot of moving parts here. That's what's tough.
Oh, I gotcha. And I think the next thing is something that I covered in the blog was the lawsuit that was filed.
Mhm.
Was it a week ago, 2 weeks ago now?
Right. So the lawsuit was filed last Monday, I believe the 25th. And so that lawsuit is, the plaintiffs in the suit are a group of 11 taxpayers from Rockport. None of them are firemen or firefighters. 2 of them are former selectmen in Rockport. And, you know, various people from all walks of life in Rockport who love the fire department. I mean, the Rockport Fire Department is a big part of Rockport. It's not, you know, I'm sure in every community where they have volunteer firemen, it becomes essentially the community. But Rockport is one of those. I mean, you know, the 4th of July parade and the bonfire. I mean, that is Rockport. You know, that day is Rockport, and the firemen do it all. I mean, they're a big part of our lives. I mean, I have a bunch of little kids, and I was traveling for work a couple of years ago, and my youngest at the time, who was 1, got locked in a bedroom, and it was my bedroom, my wife and our bedroom, and there's a Juliet balcony on that bedroom. So my wife got really nervous that somehow our little boy was going to sneak out onto this Juliet balcony because she couldn't get in. So she called her father, Jimmy Doyle, fire chief, and he put an alert out on the radio. And my wife says that within 45 seconds of her hanging up the phone with her father, there was someone in the driveway running into the house. And, you know, he's a guy that lives in our neighborhood who's also a fireman, a volunteer fireman. And he was there within 40, like right then. And my son was fine. So, you know, the Rockport Fire Department is very special to everybody in Rockport. And nobody wants that to change. And I think that for the town to even come out and say, and when I say the town now, for the selectmen and even this town administrator to even come out at this point and say, well, we never want the fire department to not be volunteer. We don't want these changes. We love our volunteers. Then why did you do this? Then why did you put the assistant police chief in charge of them? Why? They didn't, the Board of Selectmen had the wisdom and foresight not to make this assistant police chief the police chief about, a year or two earlier. But now he's in charge of the fire department? Let's think about that for a second.
Well,
but the lawsuit, back to the lawsuit.
Right. But from a big picture perspective,
yeah.
Has the fire department burned down buildings? Is that what the town is concerned about? Are they not getting out for runs? I mean, what?
Honestly, Curt, I don't think there's any concerns about the fire department. There was no one was ever concerned about the fire department. All of this just happened as some type of a movement in the spring of 2019 where certain people got pay raises and stipends to do jobs that the firemen were doing. And at the same time, let's hire the police chief's wife to come in and investigate the fire chief. And now we're here. And quite frankly, I think that everyone thought that Chief Doyle, Jimmy, was just going to retire and walk away. He has to retire in 10 months. He reaches the maximum age of 65 in 10 months. And this is what they want to do.
Dignity.
What's that?
They can't let him go out with dignity. They've got to drag him through the mud.
Apparently.
Wow.
Apparently. And obviously, I'm not going to let that happen.
No, I mean, I've seen this happen before. There's a case I covered down in Maryland where you'll get a kick out of this one. That was a female attorney who specialized in employment law, and in particular employment discrimination law, and in particular sexual harassment and gender discrimination, who joined the local volunteer fire department, and they apparently started playing games with her and disciplining her and writing her up. It's kind of like walking into a bar and picking a fight with Chuck Norris. Like, you're not serious here.
That's yeah.
And so in your situation, it's not picking a fight with Chuck Norris. It's picking a fight with Chuck Norris's father-in-law. I mean, and
I don't know. I think that they.
But I understand. I've been on the other side of this, representing towns.
Yeah.
And when you realize that there's an attorney on the other side, pro bono, with a family member, you have to really do some calculations about maybe we think we're right, but I don't know. You would think. I don't know. I don't know.
I don't know either. I would say this: if I thought that as an attorney, if I thought that Jimmy should retire, he would have retired. I mean, it's that simple. This whole thing is just a charade. I mean, really, the town doesn't want to deal with the fact that they allowed all these things to happen with our tax money. They put a police officer in charge of the fire department. They hired the police chief's wife to investigate, not just Chief Doyle, other firemen, other firefighters she investigated. I mean, are we insane? Are we losing our mind here? Like, am I taking crazy pills, or did the town hire the police chief to investigate the fire chief? I mean, literally. Yeah. And the lawsuit really does explain it all. That lawsuit, speaking, attorney to attorney, that lawsuit's almost a summary judgment. It's not even a complaint. This is the law. You violated it. Fix it.
Yeah, and I'll post a copy of that, and I'll post a link to my previous coverage with this, so folks can get right to it. You've got another issue coming up, though. You got the lawsuit filed, and that's alleging essentially that the city engaged in a bunch of activities that they didn't have a legal authority to engage in. What's the next? So
the next thing is his termination hearing. If that's what they called it, at least in private. Publicly they're not calling that anymore. They're using other words, but in private they called it a termination hearing. So initially what happened was on December 9th, they emailed me a month after they put Chief Doyle on leave. They emailed me a copy of Chief Doyle's termination letter, which enumerates the various allegations that the town administrator now has come up with against Chief Doyle. And this is why they want to push him out, right? And they schedule him for a termination hearing the following week. And that got continued and continued and continued. And they finally renoticed it for January 26th at 10 a.m. in the morning in executive session. So the week prior, after I received the notice, I emailed the town and I said, listen, number one, Chief Doyle wants this public, open, and in the evening so the public can actually watch it. And your notice has to be public and open. You know, this notice doesn't tell anybody what's going on. Chief Doyle wants the notice to be clear that this is about him so that people actually know what is going on in this town, not at 10 a.m. on a Tuesday morning. The town responded denying that request. And this is what they literally told me. They said, no, we're not going to do that. But if you want it to be open and public before the meeting, tell us and we'll make it open. So at 10 a.m. in the morning, when no one's watching the Board of Selectmen meeting because everybody's at work, they're then going to give me the opportunity a minute before the meeting to make it open so that no one knows about it, but it's open. And the town, there was some issues with their notice. And I think that most people in the town saw right through this. So they ended up changing that and they made it a public meeting in the evening. And it was scheduled for last Thursday, the 28th at 6 p.m. And when we got on the call, on the Zoom call at 6 p.m., there was 300 people on the call and they only had a 300 person license. And the town, you know, I asked the town that day, how many people can your license, you know, handle? And they responded to me with, I don't know. So, you know, not only did they not know, they didn't care, obviously. So we went ahead with this meeting at 6 o'clock, I didn't know how many people that could fit this thing. And we get there, it's 300 people, it's maxed out. And their response was, well, IT is going to monitor the waiting room. And if people show up in the waiting room over 300, we'll stop the meeting. Even if that was actually how Zoom worked, it would still be bogus and in violation of the open meeting law. But that's actually not how Zoom works. Your license for 300 participants, that includes the meeting and the waiting room. There's a whole separate queue of people that are trying to get access. And you only end up from the queue being transferred to the waiting room if someone leaves the meeting room. So God knows how many people were in the queue that night and they wanted to rely on the IT director. I mean, since when do we have open meetings that have a gatekeeper? You know, oh, we're going to let this guy tell us if anyone else wants to come and, you know, let's rely on him. That's not how it works. We don't have a gate. We don't have a doorman at public meetings, open meetings. We don't do that. And so it was postponed. And, you know, the chairman of the Board of Selectmen says that night, personally, I had no idea there would be this many people. Now, this has been all over the local paper. It's been all over New England Channel News, NECN, NBC Boston 10. It's been on Fire Law. It's been on Rescue One. It's been on the other fire magazine there. It's been all over. It's been all over social media. You can't drive down a road in Rockport without seeing a support the Rockport Volunteer Fire Department sign. And the chairman of the Board of Selectmen didn't know. I don't really get it, Curt. At this point, I'm not surprised by much with this because it's just every day it's a different iteration of the nightmare playing out in a different way, which doesn't make sense to anybody with common sense. But, you know, we will go ahead and we will have this hearing publicly, and the town can explain to the public why they're trying to get rid of a guy who's been a volunteer for 46 years. He's been a Board of Engineer member for over 20. He's been the fire chief for over 10, and he's been the fire inspector for over 20 years. And they're going to get rid of this guy because they screwed up and they violated the law and put the wrong people in charge of the fire department. And their reasons for getting rid of Chief Doyle in that termination letter, the reasons that they enumerated in that termination letter are insane. They're so absurd. You know, I think that's why they don't want this meeting in public, quite frankly. Because the reasons for them trying to get rid of Chief Doyle are Chief Doyle allegedly refused to discipline a fireman that the assistant police chief told him to. So now we have the assistant police chief giving Chief Doyle an unlawful order, and Chief Doyle doesn't do it. There's 2 counts of that. Okay, and there's only 6 counts total.
To follow an illegal order.
Yeah, there's only 6 counts total, and I was in the Coast Guard for 13 years. I know unlawful orders, right?
Yes, you cannot you're not supposed to follow an unlawful order.
Right. So 2 of the 6 counts, a third of the reason for him being placed on leave and for going ahead with termination, a third of them is because he refused to discipline a fireman when the assistant chief of police told him to.
What's the chance that they're going to come to their senses and say, maybe we ought to just put the backup alarm on and back our way out of this?
I honestly have no idea. I mean, I'm clueless when it comes to that. You know why? Because they let this go this far. I mean, we're in month 4 of this.
They're too far down the road to put the.
Yeah, I mean, they should have nipped this in the bud as soon as they realized that, oh, we weren't supposed to put a cop in charge of the fire department. We weren't supposed to make this town administrator the public safety commissioner. We weren't supposed to disband the personnel board and make the town administrator the HR director. I mean, think about that for a second. You had a situation where the town administrator was the public safety commissioner in charge of all these people illegally, and he's the HR director. So if you have a problem with your boss or with the town administrator, you have to go to him. When the town administrator job was open for applications, if you wanted to see what the job description was, and if you wanted to apply to be the town administrator, guess who got the emails for that? The then assistant town administrator, now the town administrator. So, I mean, people need to wake up and start reading meeting minutes, because you're going to see how all these things are playing out in this little town of Rockport, and it's just bananas. And
such a beautiful town too.
Oh my God! I mean,
that's the folks from California and Colorado and others that kind of follow fire law.
It's absolutely beautiful.
It's the quintessential New England fishing village.
Yeah.
Look at it on the map. Google Rockport, Massachusetts, and go down to Street View.
It's a beautiful, quaint little place. And before I got involved with this, I had no clue that the Rockport Board of Selectmen and the town administrator and town hall had all these layers upon layers of issues and mismanagement. I had no idea. I just thought everybody, kind of did their job. And then the last thing I'll mention from the termination letter, the real grievous charge against Chief Doyle, because there's been all sorts of rumors running around, right? The real grievous charge, and this is just unbelievable, okay? And let me read it, because I just want to make sure I get the words correctly here. Sorry, Curt. Hopefully you can edit this part out.
We do as little editing as possible. We want it to be au naturel.
Oh, good. So, given that you accept cash payments for inspections, this is as his fire inspector role. Aside from being the fire chief, he works 16 hours a week as the fire inspector for Rockport. So he inspects, smoke alarms, the boilers, all that stuff. And he's been doing that for over 20 years. Mm-hmm. And I can't wait till he retires. You know how many lawyers call me looking for favors because they know that Jimmy's my father-in-law because there's a house closing the next day and no one did the smokes? You know how many times lawyers have called me and, I've got, and Jimmy will go out at 9:00 at night or Saturday and do an inspection.
Our fire marshal does the same thing.
They do it. They just get it done. And,
what are you going to do?
That type of person's not going to operate in this bureaucratic little world where you're not allowed to do any work after 5 o'clock,
Mhm.
you know? But this is what his letter says. Given that you accept cash payments for inspections, this failure to maintain adequate records of your inspections is particularly troubling, as there is simply no way for the town to verify that you are turning over all cash payments made. Indeed, there is some evidence suggesting that you are not doing so.
Some evidence.
And here's the evidence. On average, over the past few years, you have turned over approximately $15,000 to $16,000 per year in inspection and permit fees. In fiscal year 2020, the total amount of fees reported and deposited by you was $13,410. Well, I think the town administrator has been too busy trying to get rid of their volunteer fire chief to remember that during fiscal year 2020, there was a little thing called COVID. So what he's saying here is that during fiscal years 17, 18, and 19, the average funds brought into the fire inspection were between $15,000 and $16,000. And I checked that. That's accurate. It's like $15,400, something like that. But during fiscal year 2020, he only brought in $13,400, and we can't figure out why it's under, what happened. There must be something missing. Well, there were no fire inspections conducted for over 25% of fiscal year 2020 because of COVID. The state fire marshal shut them down. I have an email from the cop who took over the fire department telling Jimmy he can't do any inspections starting March 15th. So he's about 15% under what the average previous 3 years was. But for over 25% of the year, he didn't do one inspection. And this is some evidence suggesting that, there's something missing. I mean, this is literally where we're at. And I can't wait.
Sounds like a stunt that Roger Goodell would pull.
It sounds like they didn't think that Jimmy would take it this far. That's what I think. And I can't wait.
They didn't realize Chuck Norris was standing in the corner.
Yeah, and I can't wait for the hearing. Now, they're not letting me ask the town administrator questions. They're not letting me ask the assistant police chief questions. They refuse to give me a copy of the police chief's wife's investigation report. Haven't seen a thing on it. They won't give it to me. I'm still looking for Jimmy's job descriptions. Still looking for personnel policies.
There's a right to discovery as part of due process. And if
there's no due process in this kangaroo court so far. But the one thing is, and the one saving grace I'd say is the Board of Selectmen do the right thing in the sense that they actually give them a fair hearing. They actually give them fair notice. They've screwed up the notice issue so many times. They noticed the hearing for tomorrow night, yesterday, in accordance with the open meeting law, 48 hours ahead of time. And I was delayed getting on with you today because I got an email saying that the notice for tomorrow's hearing has been amended to a different Zoom meeting info. And this is now, 24 hours out. The Gloucester Daily Times has already printed the Zoom information. Not everybody is always on the internet looking on the town website. And it's not as simple as, going into town hall or the high school for a public meeting and seeing a sign on the door that says, go down the hall to this room. We've moved it because we need a bigger room. It's not that simple. We're talking about remote meetings. We're talking about, all sorts of other issues with whether or not the Zoom meeting is really public or if there's a gatekeeper, how many people can even access it. It's problematic to me. And I think that, Jimmy Doyle at the very least deserves 48 hours public notice of where the meeting actually is going to be, especially after last week's fiasco with them not being ready when they had every reason to believe that meeting would have a lot of interest. So, as of right now, the meeting is tomorrow night. I personally think that Jimmy deserves more and deserves 48 hours actual notice of the location of the meeting. But yeah, I mean, it's a little wild. The personnel board issue was not included in the complaint. So I'll be amending the complaint to include that because I'd love to know why the selectmen decided to, once again, entrust one person. We're talking about the same person over and over again that gets entrusted. And our boards, which our town charter mandates, actually, run the town. the boards are just being disbanded, or that all their authority is being usurped. And this one guy gets the power. And I'm sorry, but not here, not in this state.
It's, I think, unfortunately, I know when I get personally involved in cases like that, it's like the more you dig, the more you find, the more you dig, the more you find. And I have no doubt that as you keep digging, there's, it's why the town wouldn't see the wisdom of finding an honorable way out for everybody, especially a guy who's got to leave in 10 months anyway. So,
Right. A
but
guy who has to retire in 10 months, a guy who every fireman is telling them, every firefighter, the whole fire department saying, what are you doing? What are you doing? And, the fire department, the only reason why the selectmen even know about this problem is because the fire department told them about it. And what do? They just go do their own thing again. They trust this town administrator again. They don't trust the firemen. The firemen tell them, hey, we're screaming, we're crying for attention. We have a problem. This is how you fix it. We're telling you right now, this is how you fix it. So the Board of Selectmen learn about a problem for the first time that they created. The fire department then tells them how to fix it. And their solution is, let's talk to the town administrator and hire some consultants, throw some more cash, at some consultant to come in, half the fire department's annual budget. Let's spend it on a consultant to figure out what the right thing is to do.
all right. Well, we've been going for almost an hour, and they say rule of thumb for vlogs is really 15, 20 minutes. So we're about four times that. But hopefully, folks who hung in to the end, we'll get some insight. And Liam, I got to tell you, often I try to get attorneys on who are involved in litigation to give people an insight into what's going on in the mind of the attorney. How are you looking at the law? How are you looking at the facts? And I think you share a lot of perspectives. I think it's a fascinating case, but I think what's insightful is seeing how you're approaching the different issues and pulling things together that may not seem to be connected, but you create basically a narrative that it is pretty compelling when you put
No,
all the pieces
I
together.
appreciate it. And I think that's what's hard about this, is that it is layered. To really explain this to someone, you need some time.
Yeah,
And it's a layered issue.
it's
And
it's tough in
quite,
our current world where ADD
uh,
and people just want a short story.
right.
But
Now, and the other thing too is typically these things end in litigation, and the insurance company pays out something and it ends up in a confidentiality clause, and no one's the wiser, and people disappear. And Chief Doyle, Jimmy, I'm very close with him, and he has been a volunteer fireman in this town because he cares about this town, not because he wanted money, not because he wants money now. It has nothing to do with this. He wants to be able to retire with dignity because of the legacy that he created. And I'd like all the selectmen to think about how many of their kids and their nieces and nephews Jimmy Doyle has brought over the fire station on his own time to bring their kids in a fire truck and to show them the trucks. This is a guy who's been doing this for decades. And I think it's tough dealing with this personally. I have other clients that probably are wondering where I am, but we'll get through it as a family and everything else. But I think the town is also behind Jimmy, and I think that means a lot.
all right, and that's going to do it for another edition of Fire Law.